Hi students, so today we're going to be looking at one of the larger units, and by larger units I'm just talking about there's just so much going on during this French Revolution and Napoleon. A lot of details that unfortunately we kind of have to go over, even though we are talking about a very, very brief review of this period, but there always seems to be some sort of questions on there, whether it be writing or multiple choice dealing with the French Revolution. I know in 2019 there was a short answer dealing with the French Revolution. So let's go and get in it. And the French Revolution can really be brought up into stages. And that's usually how we kind of learn it. So, before we get into the stages, let's kind of build this background that's going on in France at this time. So this is known as the Old Regime. And this old regime dates back, hundreds of years. If we're really going to focus on the French Revolution aspects of it, France is starting to go into debt. And how they're starting to go into debt is from King Louis XIV. It's going to be a lot of his wars that are going to be putting, France in some financial situations in which Colbert is trying to get them, out of it. He creates this Palace of Versailles, and just the upkeep of the Palace of Versailles is already a huge portion of the French, budget already, that it's draining a lot of its resources. And another thing is that Louis the 15th, after Louis the 14th dies, Louis the 15th has a lot of corruption that's going on, so that's where a lot of the money's going there. And then when we go to King Louis the 16th, um, a lot of money is being spent on the American Revolution, on helping the United States, break away from England after France is humiliated during the 7 Years' War. So you can see that there is a very common theme of wars, corruption, the Palace of Versailles. This upkeep of this huge, gigantic palace is starting to drain onto resources, and Louis the 16th realizes that something needs to be done. So he calls on the Estates General, which is the legislative branch, I guess you would say, of this government. And it's like one of the first times that they're being called in like over 100 years. And the Estates General is three different groups. It's brought up. It's split up into three different estates. You have the first estate, which is clergy members. The second estate, which is the nobles, and then the third estate is everybody else, all the way from peasants up to the bourgeoisie, the bougie people. Okay, so you have, doctors and lawyers all the way down to peasants kind of making up this third estate. And that third estate is 95% of the French population. Nobles were counted somewhere between like 2 to 4%, usually like around 4%, and then the clergy was about 1%. Now, the way the Estates General works is that each estate has one vote. So, pretty much two votes from the first and second estate would obviously beat out the 95% of the other vote. So, what Louis does is that in May of 1789, he calls on the Estates General to try to figure out how to settle these debts. And obviously, the third estate saying, well, start taxing the nobles and the clergy because they're barely taxed to even begin with, while us third estaters have poll taxes and tithes and all sorts of land taxes, so we're already taxed enough already. So go after the first and second estate. Well, the first and second estate look at each other and laugh and like, yeah, no thanks. We're going to vote against you guys, and we're going to say, how about you tax them a little bit more? So this is where now you're going to see the anger, the upsettingness of everything, in which now the third estate by June of 1789, they are going to break away, and they're going to create the National Assembly. And later in that same exact month, they are locked out of the Estates General, this National Assembly, so they go to a tennis court. It's actually an indoor tennis court. Everyone always thinks that this is going to happen outside. They actually go to an inside tennis court, and they create the tennis court oath. And this tennis court oath was going to bring about a unity, a unification of this third estate to try to right the wrongs of this current and corrupt government. So, July, their fears, there's going to be a lot of food riots that are going on, and this National Assembly, specifically more your sans culottes, who are actually, it's translated into like, you know, the pantless, because they wear their pants up a little bit higher so you can see like their stockings and whatnot. They go and they storm the Bastille, which is a symbol of this old regime. And the Bastille is a prison that is holding a lot of political prisoners and debtors and whatnot and criminals. And they storm the Bastille and they free it. And it's now a French like Independence Day holiday of July 14th. After that, in August, this National Assembly, they abolish feudalism and mannerism, these old ideals of this old regime, and they now get rid of them. At the same time, in August, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen is passed by the National Assembly, and this National Assembly, at least these rights, is supposed to be freedom of press and speech and the freedom of religion, all of these natural rights that the Enlightenment was trying to bring about. So you can really say that the Enlightenment does, in fact, inspire the French Revolution. Specifically, if we're going to talk about one specific enlightened individual, it would be Rousseau. So all of these things are going on, but at the same time in August, there's something called the Great Fear. And this Great Fear was that this first and second estate were going to rise back up again and punish, this third estate, all these new peasants and, the bourgeois and the merchants, and punish them and then put down this rebellion. So there is a fear that is going on. So people are going to start to really kind of go after nobles a little bit, and there's going to be some class warfare. In October, this is all in the same year, 1789, Jean-Paul Marat, who is this revolutionary writer, inspires women to go to Versailles and make a march onto Versailles. So that kind of leads up into 1789. Now, 1790, you start to have the civil constitution of the clergy, in which pretty much clergy members have to now be elected into positions. So no longer is the papacy going to have any control on the church properties and church holdings at this time. By 1791, Louis realizes the writing's on the wall, and he pretty much creates a constitutional monarchy. So it ends this absolutist rule that is going on. Now, also in the same time period, Louis tries to escape. And his family, they try to go to Austria. His wife, Marie Antoinette, is Austrian, and they figured they escape and they go to Austria. Maybe they, with the help of the Austrian government, they could actually go and take back their throne. But the thing is, they're captured. They're captured before they can even make it to the border, and they're brought back. And this kind of is, the nail in the coffin for Louis for the rest of the time. They pretty much strip him of his entire power, and that's going to be about it for him. And eventually what's going to happen is that he is going to be executed, but we're going to get into that when we go into the second stage. So this first stage, this initial stage, goes from about 1789 to about 1792. So the second stage, going from 1792 to 1795, now strikes have already been ended and everything, and these foreign other countries, Prussia and Austria, have all made declarations that if the royal family is hurt, they will declare war on this new French government. Other things that are going on is that you have a women's movement, because the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen said nothing in there about anything to do with women. So Olympia de Georges, who we had talked about during the Enlightenment, and she wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women, saying that women should be given these same exact rights and these equality. Mary Wollstonecraft even had said that where is these rights for women? So even though the French Revolution is talking about, these equality, this fraternity, all of these equal rights, they're not exactly giving any equal rights whatsoever. So by April of 1792, they declare war on Austria. All right. We kind of saw that was going to happen because now they're thinking that the Austrians are, in fact, helping out, the royal family in this case. By August of 1792, the king is taken prisoner at this point. Even before that, Prussia's threatening war, which we had already talked about, by September of 1792, the French now declare themselves the French Republic, since they had already taken Louis as prisoner, and they now call him, instead of King Louis, Citizen Louis. So by 1793, you have this first foreign coalition. And this coalition was supposed to try to help, bring a balance of power against France. And you have Austria, you have England involved, the Netherlands, Spain, Prussia. They're all joining together, and they just don't trust this French government and what's eventually going to be happening. But domestically, you have Marat, who's going to be assassinated by Charles Corday because, he's not exactly bringing about the rights of women. So now you have Danton and Robespierre that are really leading now the charge. And Robespierre creates this committee of public safety. And they're almost like a secret type of police in which people are going to report to them, and they're going to go out and they're going to, capture these people and eventually going to be executed. And Robespierre creates something called the Reign of Terror, in which then he starts killing everybody that's going to be an enemy of this French Republic. And Robespierre had publicly stated, and he starts this group called the Jacobins. And he publicly states that the king must die so that the revolution may live. And you have a split within France on whether or not he is right in these assumptions, whether or not they should actually kill the king. Well, they do kill the king, and they also will kill Marie Antoinette, all in 1793. Okay, in fact, Robespierre executes about 75% of the peasant class during this time. We're talking about, I believe, over like 20,000 people that he ends up killing during this reign of terror. Other things that he does is now this Republic of Virtue, in which the clergy is completely, disbanded. He de-Christianizes France, and you see this in a lot of dictatorial governments in which they try to remove religion, because religion sometimes can be a unification aspect against their power. So if they remove religion, there we go. And Robespierre changes the calendar. He changes the work week. He pretty much wants them to kind of move away from the rest of the world in this case. And by 1794, Robespierre is afraid of Danton, and he actually executes his friend Danton. By also 1794, everyone's had enough of Robespierre. He's just killing everyone. So he is the last victim of this reign of terror, which once he dies in this reign of terror, that is it. The French, revolution, like what we would know as the revolution, this reactionary stage is now over. So when we look at this final stage, this reactionary stage of 1795 to 1799, this killing of Robespierre, they were calling it the Thermidorian reaction because it happens in Thermidor, this month that Robespierre created. But moving on, what France does, they create a new system, a new executive group of 5 members called the Directory. And these 5 individuals were, created from the National Assembly to try to help rule. What is interesting about this directory is that there seemed to have been a riot that was happening, and there's a young commander named Napoleon Bonaparte who puts down this rebellion and is going to be successful. And when that happens, the directory rewards Napoleon with control of the army. And when he has control of the army, you're going to see that Napoleon is going to use this military control to eventually give him the power and glory that he wants. Little background on Napoleon. Napoleon is from an island of Corsica, which used to be owned by the Italians, but the Italians had sold this island to France right before Napoleon was born. So Napoleon, growing up with an Italian dialect speaking French, he is mostly bullied and ridiculed throughout a lot of his younger life, which you can see why eventually he's going to use that type of bullying and torment to eventually become Emperor of France. So, this last part of this whole French Revolution saga is going to be how Napoleon is going to react and what he's going to do, how he gets power, and what he does for France, going from this old regime to under a French dictatorship under Napoleon Bonaparte. Some quick reactions from the French Revolution. A lot of people are going to be inspired by the ideas of the French Revolution. Other people are going to condemn the violence. Like Edmund Burke of England said that violence in this case was completely wrong. And then you have a lot of the feminist movements going to be starting, in which these feminists are saying, well, yeah, French Revolution may have been great for, a lot of people, but it doesn't exactly help half of the people they were trying to help, since the women were not giving any rights. So just keep that in mind, these reactions towards these French Revolution. Not everyone's for it, and in fact, if anything, probably more people are going to be against it, either for the violence aspect of it or because the lack of women's rights that were actually presented through the French Revolution. So 1799, Napoleon brings this military, into battle, and he has a lot of victories. He, beats the Austrians at one point. He fights the British in Egypt. So he's really making a name for himself. And he goes back to France with this military, and he has this military coup in which he overthrows the Directory and creates a consulate. And in the consulate, it was going to be these three consuls, and Napoleon declares himself to be head consul of them all. And then we're going to look at Napoleon's domestic reforms first, and then we'll talk about his foreign policy and foreign items. So some of his domestic reforms, one of the few first things he does is that he will declare himself emperor. In fact, he grabs the crown from the Pope and he puts the crown on his head. And why that's so important is that first he says that no man shall crown, an emperor, someone that's from God. So Napoleon's already thinking that he has been sent from God to be a leader. But since the Pope was there, this now gives legitimacy to Napoleon as being a ruler, throughout all of Europe. So just keep that in mind, that this is something very, very important to know of this idea. So he does pass the Code Napoleon, which is a domestic policy, and which then it's going to have a medieval laws, but at the same time, it's going to be a uniform legal system. So, for example, with the Code Napoleon, men, you are, at least with this legal system, you are guilty until proven innocent. So in France at this time, let's say you commit a crime, you have to prove your innocence or you're automatically guilty. If you can't have some sort of evidence there that says you are 100% innocent, that's it, no more. Also, men could cheat on their wives anywhere they wanted except for inside of their homes. Now, if women cheated at all, that was completely wrong. So you can see where now this is going to be more of a male-dominated legal system. He also has a state-supported education system in 1808, so he creates a governmental public education system. He created a merit system in the government, so if you have good deeds, you are going to be promoted. He also created, independent peasants that are going to be the backbone of this French democracy. Napoleon also kind of takes over. It's the Concordat of 1801, in which he takes over a lot of these Christian or the Catholic church holdings, in which then he is allowed to start nominating bishops. So this religious aspect of it, in which now he's being granted more power, and that the papacy is actually listening to what he is saying. He does lower taxes on farmers, so that's another thing. So his domestic policies, he's trying to revamp domestically within France. Whether or not he does a good job, that's a different story, but he is making things more stable from the chaotic time period of what this French Revolution was happening. It's his foreign policies in which things are kind of going a little bit haywire. One of his first major defeats is in Haiti in 1804, where the Haitians have a revolutionary independence movement in which they become independent. Another thing that he does is that he starts doing nepotism. He starts putting his family members into onto thrones of different countries in order to expand his empire that way. He controlled most of Italy by 1809, but he does not unify Italy. He has taken over Austria and Prussia, but he does unify them to make them the Confederation of the Rhine. So he does do a lot of different things. Now, the thing is with England, he knows that he doesn't want to invade the island, so he creates the continental system, in which he figured economically he could try to destroy the British that way. So he gets other European countries, a lot of them all have, Bonapartes as their, you know, kings and queens and whatnot, the rulers, and to order a boycott of all British goods and trading with them. So this continental system does, have some sort of negative feedback for the British, which is why, the British and the French were always, or at least the British were always kind of messing with the Americans during right before the War of 1812 because of this continental system. And the thing is that one of Napoleon's greatest allies is going to be Russia. He had a very, very close relationship with Tsar Alexander I, in which Napoleon, I say bromance, you can kind of interpret it what other way that you want to interpret it. That he does say at one point that if Alexander was a woman, he would marry him. So I don't know what that really means. I just think that they're just kind of like bromancing with each other. So they were allies, but Alex turns on him. So Napoleon decides to go and attack Russia, in which he does take over the city of Moscow, but it's been completely burnt down. There's no more resources. So when he's marching back, his soldiers are all dying because it's cold. So the Russian winter kind of, hurts Napoleon to a point that by the time he gets back to France, he's forced to abdicate the throne in 1814, in which then he is sent to the island of Elba. He does escape and he comes back to France for 100 days, in which then he will lose at the Battle of Waterloo. When he loses at the Battle of Waterloo, he's sent to St. Helena, in which eventually he's going to die, and we all know that he was pretty much poisoned. Now, even though Napoleon kind of dies, this is all being created because of this Congress of Vienna, in which you have a bunch of different people that are going to come together to talk about Napoleon specifically and how to control Europe once again. So the Congress of Vienna is being led by a Austrian named Metternich. Okay, and Metternich, with the help of Talleyrand, and then Tsar Alexander was there as well. There's 5 different countries that are going to be there. They come up with 5 different things to try to eliminate France from being a powerful country again, like the way under Napoleon. So Holland and Belgium are going to unite, and it's going to be known as Kingdom of the Netherlands. Prussia is going to have satellite nations along the Rhine. Austria is going to have a buffer state, of northern Italy. The Habsburg Empire the Holy Roman Empire will never again, rise up or become really an empire. And then the last thing is that all those German states, there was like 300 German states, they're going to start consolidating into the 39 that Napoleon had pretty much originally did. Now, with that, they create this concert of Europe, and it's an alliance between Russia, Prussia, England, and Austria. And they were allied to try to control France so that France would never go into a state like this again. Now, the thing is that the Congress of Vienna, which is in 1815, and this is going to go into our next video when we talk about the isms of industrialization, Metternich and these individuals want conservatism. They wanted to go back to the way that it used to be back in the 1600s with these strong central rulers, and they want to eliminate these liberal ideas, these liberalism ideas, progressive ideas that the French Revolution and the Enlightenment had, in that case, and the influences that they have. So keep that in mind, that this Congress of Vienna really is a conservative meeting to try to control the people again and to put that third estate, in which we called it, back into its place. Now, if we're talking about these criticisms of Napoleon, Napoleon limits freedoms. He has a secret police. He censors people. So a lot of people, when they look at Napoleon, it's almost like the beginnings of a fascist movement or a totalitarian state movement that we're going to see later in the 1900s. And a lot of people like to make connections between, the fascists like Hitler, Mussolini, Franco, okay, even your totalitarian, total state people like Joseph Stalin, okay, and compare them to Hitler. So use that if you need to, if there happens to be some sort of DBQ or writing on Napoleon. Other than that, thank you very much for being a part of this episode today of Peace History Time for the French Revolution and Napoleon. I know that it was definitely longer than the other ones, but this was a brief overview. Make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you watch the next one on the AP European Review playlist. I also have an APUSH one going as well. Until then, good luck studying and get a 5 on that test.